In this video, we've got a truck that's losing coolant, but it's not leaking. It's winding up in the fuel system. We do not have fuel in the coolant though, we only have coolant in the fuel. So what are we going to find is causing this? Well, it's going to involve pulling the valve cover, pulling the injectors out, and pressurizing the cooling system to hopefully find what the heck is going on here. Hey guys, Josh with the Update Channel, and today we're going to be going to a town called Priest River and looking at a truck that has coolant in the fuel, but it doesn't have fuel in the coolant. You might be wondering, well, what's weird with that? I mean, obviously coolant in the fuel is weird, but usually you get fuel in the coolant when you have a injector cup or injector sleeve, some people call them, problem. This one only has coolant in the fuel though, which is unusual. So we're gonna drive out there and see what is happening. Yeah, I was taking the Spirit Lake cutoff road here up to Priest River. Beautiful Priest River, pretty close here. You can see it across the river here, and quite the scenic spring day here. Let's get to work. So this is a truck. It's a Ford F750 with a Cat C7 in it. Looks like the Huey pump has been replaced before. Not too surprising. Running non-cat filters, but that's not what causing our problem here, folks. Customer said they had just filled it to the max before they brought the truck over to the shop here. And there is no signs of fuel in the coolant. No scent of it. The coolant level is not rising. There's no separation of fluid there. But if you look at the bowl here, which is not the cleanest, but it's red. And it should be clear, obviously, because this truck is running clear diesel fuel. As you can see here, hopefully see, it's a little hard to see, but normal diesel's in there, not dyed fuel. But for whatever reason, we're getting that red in the fuel. And the only things red on here are transmission fluid and coolant. And there's really no place for transmission fluid to get in the fuel system. So it's definitely coolant. We're also losing coolant here. You can see kind of a reddish tinge coming out here. We're going to drain some out just to see that it separates. And we're just going to drain it until it runs clear. Didn't see a ton in the tanks, but those tanks are pretty hard to see. So a couple seconds later here, you can see it's now running clear out of there. So we've basically drained the fuel, or well, we've drained the coolant out of the fuel. And if you don't know, coolant and water are heavier than fuel. That's how a fuel water separator works. So looking at it here, you can definitely see the separation of the two different fluids. Fuel and coolant act differently when just sloshing around here. Could I put it in a clear vase or something and take a look? Yes, but the customer done that themselves, and yeah, it's separated. They definitely do have coolant in their fuel here. Now, normally it's an injector cup causing this problem, but normally it puts fuel in the coolant, not just coolant in the fuel. So what we're going to do is we're going to see by removing the injectors and taking a look at the cup, which means we're going to have to pull the valve cover, which means we're going to pull this air filter housing, which the air filter housing on these Fords aren't super difficult to get off. Probably the hardest part is Ford doesn't believe in rubber hoses. They use hard plastic ones, and they are much harder to get off in general than the rubber ones. So we're just getting this, this is the truck side harness, not the engine harness, just trying to loosen it enough to get the valve cover out of the way without fully disconnecting everything. I've also got this one coolant line that runs over to the air compressor. And just getting our bolts out here. And one thing that I've done is, if you ever notice me removing bolts, I don't leave the bolts in whatever I'm removing and then remove them all at once. I always remove the bolts, then remove whatever I'm removing. Been a few times where I tried it the other way, and generally all the bolts and spacers and washers go flying all over the place. So we now have our valve cover off, and take a look at the injectors here. They are reman injectors, so these have been replaced before. And we're working outside here, folks. Yes, but if you noticed, I have the turbocharger capped off. I've got the air filter housing capped off. Try to keep it as clean as possible, even though we're working in a yard. Now, I bought one of these things. It's called a track creeper or an outdoor creeper or something. It's basically like a canvas or, I don't know, cloth track that you kind of roll on. I like it. It works better than a creeper for just rolling under quickly something. It folds up, doesn't barely weigh anything. They're not sponsoring the video. I've used it a few times, and I was like, you know what? I kind of like this thing, so I keep it in the van here. One of the other things I like is this ladder that I bought. I use it all the time as a step. It works really good, and it doesn't take up too much space. I still have the tag on it for some reason. I'll probably take that off the step, but it's keeping the step clean. So we're going to set this puppy up. We're going to pull the injectors out, all 6 of them. And then we're going to pressurize the cooling system and see what the heck is going on. Hopefully we can find that a cup is leaking. If none of the cups are leaking though, that would be a problem because I'm not really sure where else you'd be getting that problem, at least visibly. It could be something weird with the head could be cracked because you do have coolant passages and fuel passages and high pressure oil passages in the head, but the cups are the most likely cause here, even though you're not getting the normal symptom of fuel in the coolant. You're only getting coolant in the fuel. So first part of pulling these injectors out is of course removing the hold down bolts. Pretty easy to do. I always start on the intake side because the exhaust side is seated. The intake side is not. It's only torqued to about close to 10 foot-pounds. So once those bolts are out, they're basically junk. You're not supposed to reuse the injector hold down bolts. We've got all the bolts out. We've unclipped the injectors from the harness. They are ready to remove. Now you'll notice here I'm actually rotating it slightly. If you rotate the injectors, they come out easier. But they're still not easy to get out. C7 injectors are one of the harder to remove injectors. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to try something. I'm going to try and put a wedge bolt under the intake side of the bracket that holds the injector on. And I made this. It's a T-bolt off of a clamp with a nut on it. And what it'll do is it'll go in the intake side bolt for the injector, and then I'll rotate the injector back in place. So I'm going to rotate the injector out of place, as I always do. It helps break up the O-rings that are seated to the head. Then I'm going to put our little T-bolt here in the hole. Then I'm going to rotate the injector back over, so the bracket is over the head of this bolt. And you'll see what I'm doing here. Now, there's not a lot of places to pry here. I'm going to use the base of the rocker arm here. It's about the strongest thing. You don't want to pry on the valves or anything like that. And you don't have to put a ton of force here. But the rocker arm's super strong. It'll be fine. So rotated the injector back in place. So now that bracket that pivots is over the bolt head, so it can't pivot out of way. Because I think what happens a lot of times is when you're trying to remove the injector, you're kind of putting a side load on the bracket. So what you're going to do here is now it won't put a side load. Hopefully it'll pop right out. And it did. It did a lot easier. I've done a lot of C7 injectors. Definitely probably over 200. And that's one of the easiest ones to ever pop out. So try that little trick. I don't remember if someone had mentioned something similar to that in the previous video where I was doing the van injectors. Or not van, the schoolie injectors. But yeah, that helped quite a bit. So then you just, once it's mostly unseated, you can just pull the rest down. You might be saying, well, Josh, you already got some of the injectors out. Yeah, I tried this a couple times before filming it just to see if it was easier, and it certainly was. So I'm glad I tried that little trick. So I got kind of a time lapse here just doing the other ones. Number one was tricky just because we got this darn harness and this hose in the way. But, well, I don't want to remove that hose because that hose is a coolant hose, and I need to keep coolant in the system to pressurize the system to see if we have a leak. So if I drain the coolant, remove the hose, then I would just have to put the hose back on to refill the cooling system, do our tests. So, yeah, got to think ahead here, folks. So what we got our injectors out. Take a look in the bore here. We've got our pressure tester hooked up but not pressurized yet. Just want to show you the injector cups or sleeves. Some people call them coppers, although these are not copper. They're stainless steel or steel. But as you can see them here, this is the cup. If you're unfamiliar, it sits in the bottom of the cylinder head and basically seals the cooling system in the head from the injector and the combustion chamber. So what we're going to do now is we are going to, you can see they're kind of dirty, but we're just going to pressurize it and see if we get a leak. And then if we do, then we know what we got to do. So before we pressurize and look for a leak, I was going to look at the injectors themselves just to see if there's any evidence of coolant or a bad seal on them that could be leading us to find what the heck's going on. None of the O-rings look blown out. You can see that's the bottom seal there for the fuel system. That's Huey oil, and then that's the fuel system. So the cups would have to be leaking coolant past that lower seal into the fuel rail there. Now you might be saying, well, how is that even possible, Josh? Isn't the fuel system pressure higher? Well, yes, it is when it's running. But you remember there's pressure in the cooling system after the engine's running when there's no fuel system pressure. So we're at 7 psi. This is a 15 psi system, but I only want to make it to 7 because with the injectors removed, nothing really holds these cups in other than the press fit. So let's get over to number 3. Look at that. I'm going to zoom in here. Hopefully you can see. Coolant! Look at that. Coolant's coming out of there. Now, the goat or sheep was screaming there, but guess what? That's really good news because that's what we wanted to find. If we didn't find a leaking cup, that would suspect maybe a bad head or something else really weird. Since we do have the cups leaking here, we have visual evidence of that. We now know the source of the leak is the cups, which is good because it's always good to verify it before replacing or doing any major repairs if you can. So it looks like just 3 and 4 were the culprits there. Of course, we didn't pressurize it anymore. Really no reason to. You don't want to pressurize it to 20 psi and hope one of the cups blows out. So let us drain the coolant now. And let's get to removing these cylinder cups, injector cups. Now this here is Priest River. We are sitting close to the train yard here and the river. Quite beautiful here. Green, trees, mountains, pretty much everywhere you look up here. North Idaho and it's a nice spring day. I'll take it. So this is the kit we're using. It's a Ferrum kit, which I haven't used their tools before. They are not sponsoring this video. And the shop owner here, Garrett, he bought this tooling to do this job. And I haven't used their tools before. I have used the CAT tooling. This is not like the CAT C7 tooling that I'm familiar with. This is different. This is a huge tap, a 1-inch tap. And it looks like you use the tap to tap the cup. And then you thread in that adapter, I guess you'd call it, bracket, puller. And then it pulls the cup out. Not like the CAT ones where it has a barbed fitting. Kind of unusual, but we'll give her a try here. So these plugs came with the kit, because one thing I was wondering is how the heck are you going to keep metal from getting into the cylinder, which is absolutely unacceptable if you are going to be tapping into that cup. I mean, there's literally the injector bore falls right into the cylinder. So they give you these 6 plugs, which fit tightly into the injector cup. Pretty nice, actually, of them to do that, because, yeah, there's no way in heck I'd be tapping the cup if there was no way to seal that chamber off, because you'd be getting those metal shavings right into the cylinder, and that is, like I said, not really acceptable. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to have to tap that cup and then drive the puller in there. What I'm going to do here is I'm just going to push that big rubber plug they give you. I'm going to seat it in there. I don't want it loose. I don't want it getting in the way of the tap. Once that puppy is seated in there, we can go ahead and try out this tool. Like I said, I have never used this style of tool before to remove a cup, but it, should work, I guess. I mean, they made it. I'd hope it'd work, so let's give it a try. So we got our big tap here. You can see I'm starting on number 2. It's the easiest to get to and doesn't have the harness and stuff in the way. I found usually when you're trying something difficult, try to do it on the easiest cylinder first. And yeah, it's a big tap, so it's going to require some force. Got to be careful though. You don't want to break the tap. You don't want to, do anything damaging to the engine here. The tap wouldn't actually dig into the head because the injector bore is much bigger than the tap. I guess if maybe the cup was out and you tried tapping it, you could try to tap into the head, but that would be no good. So yeah, just running the tap here. There's no clear stop on when to stop running the tap in there. I guess just go until you can't really go any farther. And I put my magnet in there. Try to get up any metal that's not in on top of that plug, because some does feed up around the top of the cup, and you don't want that getting in the fuel or the HUE system, obviously. Put a good amount of oil on the puller here. I found engine oil works probably best for any puller application as far as protecting the threads. You don't want them pulling or galling. So yeah, it even comes with a little roller bearing there to protect, to help roll it out of there. So yeah, all you do is thread that in now to the threaded cup and then use a wrench, pull it out. So the C13 and C15 actually have threaded cups, so you don't have to tap them like this, but they come pre-threaded. I don't know why CAT doesn't do that on the C7s. There's room for it, but for whatever reason they do not. So yeah, Did it work? Heck yeah, it did. So that's first cup getting removed here. Like I said, I pulled number 2 first, easiest to get to. Now, could I have done just 3 and 4? Yes, but that would be foolish since you've already removed all the injectors. Might as well do all 6 if you're going to do any of them. So that's the cup. Now, obviously, these cups are not reusable now. The C7 ones are pretty much never reusable because you have to either do this style or the barbed style one, which I've got a video on also. But you can see that seal worked really good for keeping the metal shavings out of the bottom side of the cup there. In my opinion, cups are never reusable, even the ones that thread in, because generally they're a press fit in the bottom part of the head. So if you distort them or anything, they're not going to seal again. So in my opinion, never reuse cups, except for coffee cups, that is. Now this is number 3, and you can see if you look at the seals, they are quite flat there. They were not sealing anymore. Hence why we were getting coolant in our fuel system, which was causing destruction. Got a few destruction of the weeks here. This one's a video, which are great, and this one's from William. Thank you for sending it. And doing the first part here without sound, and yeah, it looks like it threw a rod, but it's still running. So here it is with sound. Our next one here is from Tristan, and he sent this what I thought was windshield wipers on the floor, but oh no, folks. Let's take a little closer look here. These are big old push rods, also lifters, part of a camshaft, some other part of the engine. Yeah, this threw a rod. It also broke the block and the camshaft right in half. Look at that. That is one of the more destructive thrown rods I have ever seen, folks. That is pretty impressive. Thank you for those pictures, Tristan. Next one's not actually a destruction, just something I found really funny. This came from Don. He mailed me this goat that screams just like this. So I named the goat Don, and it is now sitting on a 3208 piston right here on my desk as we speak. So this is what we've got is our cylinder head with the cups removed. You can see some coolant / fuel in the bottom there. A little bit of carbon buildup from where the injector sits. And we're going to clean that out, folks. So don't run with a lot of air tools anymore, folks. Just easier to use a drill or a Milwaukee die grinder. Still do have a small air compressor with me. But what I found is, yeah, drill works pretty much very well in most applications. A lot slower speed too. I don't like using a die grinder with these. They're just too high RPM. So what I'm doing here is I have these drill extensions. I'm using a brush cup sandpaper flapper wheel here. And you're not trying to remove material really, folks. You're just trying to clean the bore. You're going to have some old injector seal, cup seal, some buildup from carbon, coolant, and fuel in there. That's really, you're just trying to clean that away and leave all of the base metal on the cylinder head. You're not trying to remove any metal. You can see the cup seal area is now very clean. You do have some coolant, some carbon, and light debris there at the bottom. What I'm going to do is just wash that with some hexane. It'll wash the carbon coolant into the cylinder, and then what I'm going to do is evacuate the cylinders with a suction device. So I've already hexaned it. I didn't video it, probably should have, but I did, just trust me. And then we're going to be using this here tool, which is a sample collector tool, and then I've got a old brake line off of a 67 Ford, and then to an SOS tube. So you're going to have a lot of oil in these cylinders also because of the HUE system. When you pull the injectors, it dumps all the oil from the HUE system into the cylinders. Also, you're going to have fuel, you're going to have hexane, you're going to have coolant now. So, yeah, need to clean all that out of the cylinder. When our fuel gets pretty full, just empty it. Now, in previous videos, I've used an air snap-on brake vacuum bleeder, but I found that those do hold more fluid, which is nice, but I don't have an unlimited air supply here, so I'm using these the hand pump style now. But not like that, those plug very easily, I've found, because they have a quick connect for their tube, and the quick connect part will get carbon and debris in there, and it plugs all the time. It's a real pain in the butt. So even though it has a bigger holding chamber, This one with the smaller one works much better. Now, Sobe, the beverage company, I don't even know if they're in existence anymore, but their glass old bottles used to be the same pitch as the SOS tubes. So you could thread one of those glass Sobe bottles on, and it would hold a lot more fluid than the little, whatever this is, 4-ounce sample bottle does. But sample bottle works, you just have to empty it a few more times than you want to, basically. So we have cleaned, we have brush cupped, we've evacuated the cylinders. How do they look before we're going to install these cups? Look at that, folks. Clean enough to eat out of. Okay, probably not, but it's definitely really clean. So we've got our new cup here. We've got oil on our top seals here. And we've got retaining compound, green retaining compound. And that is to seal the bottom portion there. So you're going to slide it in there, try not to scrape off the seals. You're just going to tap it in with the non-soft-faced hammer here. You could use a soft-faced hammer, but I just like saying that because Western states didn't allow us to have real hammers anymore, so I'm using a real hammer. What do you think of that? I survived. So we've got our cup here. And take a look here. Basically what you're seeing is you want to make sure that the O-ring didn't roll out and get pinched. So we've let it set up for about an hour. What I was doing was I was resealing the injectors because they're reusing them. And while I was resealing the injectors, we're just letting that retaining compound set up. And then we've got it at 7 psi like we had it before, just to make sure we don't have any coolant spraying out all over the place. And we do not. We have successfully installed the cups. So now, time to reinstall injectors with new seals, new backup rings, and yeah, there's nothing wrong with reusing injectors, folks, unless you suspect there was a problem with them. Now, the hardest part with doing the C7 injectors is removing them. That is difficult, although with that T-bolt trick I was using earlier, made it a lot easier. But installing them is tricky because they've got 3 sets of seals, and getting the first set seated is a pain in the butt. Cat actually makes a tool to press them into the head to get them seated to this part. The tool is huge and it's a pain in the butt to use, but if you've got enough gumption, you can actually push the injector in by hand. It won't hurt the seals that way. Make sure you lubricate the seals with oil. But you can seat it, that initial portion there, and then you can safely run them in with either studs or with the hold-down bolts if you know how to do it correctly. So yeah, I've pushed them in to this point. It can be harder on, let's say, a school bus or an RV if the injector is not something you can get your arm directly over to get it seated that initial. And you don't want to hit them with a hammer or anything like that. Obviously, that could damage the injector, which are not very cheap. So what we do here is we've got our new bolts in. You don't want to reuse your bolts. And what you're going to do is you're going to seat the exhaust side bolts till they stop, aka seated. That'll help hold the injector down. Not fully seated yet, though. You're not done here. So what I do is I like to run them in by hand just in case something feels weird. And I lubricate the threads and under the head of the bolt. And you go till it's seated, and then I back them back off about 5 turns. So we're going until it's seated, backing it back off. Might be saying, why are you going to back it off? I'll show you. So once I get 5 here, then we're going to do 6. 6 was luckily not super hard to get to. Some of these chassis, 5 and 6, can be a real pain. Just going to seat that and back it off. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're actually going to start the intake side bolts now. About 5 to 7 full turns. And what that's going to do is it's going to hold that bracket that pivots in place while you seat the exhaust bolt side again for final seating. So I'm going to do that by hand, and we'll torque them after the fact. And these, like I said, the exhaust side don't actually have a torque. It just says go until they seat. So basically, till they stop, they'll bottom out in the cylinder head. And then the injector is almost fully seated. Now you run the intake side down. Now you see I'm using this stubby ratchet. These torque to, I believe the spec was 106 inch-pounds. It used to be 10 foot-pounds. I don't know why they changed it, but just do whatever Cat says for the specification. Then I'm going to use my torque wrench. I'm going to check our seated bolt. Then I'm going to actually final torque the intake side bolts. You can see I had not torque them. You don't want to torque them by hand without a torque wrench. So that's why I was using the stubby, just to kind of run them in much faster than with my torque wrench. Then I'm going to torque them, double check them all, and then the injectors are fully installed. I'm going to torque stripe everything and put the clips back on, because it would really suck to put everything back together without having the injector clips back on. Look at that torque striping. The little red paint actually keeps the bolt from backing out. Just kidding. That would be impossible. So now it's just a matter of connecting our injector clips, putting the valve cover back on. You can see number one's kind of a pain in the butt. Not much room there. Yeah, put the valve cover back on, the intake tube, and start her up. Ran it for about 20 minutes. Ran great. Another successful job. Thanks for watching.